detail when you first met Coach Drink and kind of how your relationship with him has kind of evolved into what it is today.
Well, I tell you what, Coach Drink was obviously one of the best hires that we had ever made. I'm sorry, I got a phone call coming in here. All right, I got you. Sorry. So I was a GA at Auburn in 2009, and I was a GA there with a guy named Rhett Lashley, who's the offensive coordinator now at Miami, and a guy named Chris Martin, who actually coaches high school football over in the St. Louis area now. But Chris had left to take a Division III coordinator job, and we hired Eli to take his spot as the offensive line GA for our team there at Auburn. And he came in, and obviously, as you know him, he's instantly likable guy, incredibly intelligent, and did a great job relating to the players, and sneaks up on you a little bit. He's kind of unassuming, but then you realize, man, how dedicated he is to his craft, how dedicated he is to his players, how dedicated he is to his family. And, we hit it off instantly. I was so impressed by how smart he was and how he had invested himself in everything that had gone on. And so, instantly, anytime that you're down there, we called it the engine room back in the day, right? That's where all the work gets done that nobody sees. And so we were back there just pushing through the smoke and the sweat. But, and anytime you do that, then you have a chance to grow together. Fortunately, we were both able to get our first college full-time jobs together. That was at Arkansas State in 2012 with Coach Malzahn. And, we both owe Coach Malzahn credit for stepping up and giving us that first opportunity. And so Coach, the following year when Coach Malzahn got the Auburn job, I went back with him in an off-the-field role as director of player personnel. Coach Drink had stayed with Coach Harsin. And so we had those 3 years there where we worked together, obviously got really close. His oldest daughter was in my wedding. Our wives, we both lived in little one-bedroom apartments off the Tuskegee Highway there for a couple years. And so, anytime you're like that and you're in the same fight together, then you can grow that mutual trust and respect that we talked about. As I followed his career, obviously he's done an astronomically impressive job everywhere that he's been. And we've stayed close, and we're phone buddies and talk, particularly when we get on the road recruiting and have an opportunity to stay in touch. And as his family's grown and as I've gotten married, my family's grown, we've been able to stay in touch. And when he called me about this job and offered it to me, he couldn't finish offering me the job before I accepted it. So I was, and in fact, I told him a funny story. I said, "You better mean it." I said, "Because I'm going to be there Friday and I ain't leaving. So you better make sure that you want me." So anyway, Coach Drink is an awesome person. He's obviously an awesome football coach that showed up, and the vision that he's got set forth for this team, I can't wait to help him accomplish everything that he sees for us.
Next one comes from Peter Baugh. Peter, go ahead. You're on mute, Peter.
I think I'm off mute now. But I know you're only able to watch limited parts of workouts. I think Coach Drinkwitz mentioned some of the lifting you're able to be there for. What types of things are you able to actually see that can kind of help with your evaluation going into the fall?
Are you referring, I guess, to our team?
Yeah.
Well, there's actually very little that we can participate in right now.
Okay.
Kind of some offshoot that you see them working out. It's entirely voluntary. And honestly, Peter, right now, our number one concern is the health and safety of our team. So, and part of that certainly is avoiding the virus, right? We know that we want to make sure that we protect our team from that. But the second part of that is these guys have been off and haven't been in a training environment for 3.5 months. So we want to make sure that we're putting them in a position where if we just come in and start working out like they've been working out for 3.5 months, then we're going to have injuries. We're going to have, so a large portion of this volunteer time until the NCAA brings us back is not so much about evaluation. It's more about maintenance. It's more about preparing their body for the grind that's going to come. And this is obviously a unique situation. It's not, since the NCAA has allowed us to make summers mandatory, we've really not encountered something like this, obviously. And so I hope that answers your question. We're not really
Yeah.
in an evaluation state right now. It's more of a maintenance. It's more of a building state to make sure our team's headed in the right direction, to make sure their bodies are headed in the right direction, to make sure that we re-prepare and retrain and re-get everybody back on the same page. And this, and obviously they've done a great job of opening a setting where Coach Woodfin can, guide that a little bit, and we can get guys back where they need to be.
All right, next one comes from Nate Edwards. Nate, go ahead. Excuse me.
Coach, did you learn any lessons in recruiting at UAB when you were trying to rebuild that roster that are translating currently to trying to recruit during the COVID era?
Yes, absolutely. I think anytime that experience is everything. I think the unique experiences that we had at UAB, and I'm incredibly proud of the time that we were there. That was a place that walked on. When I first got there, my first day on the job, we had 0 scholarship players, and then we went on in 3 years to win 29 games and 2 championships. But the lessons that were learned there, some are more broad, like creativity, and making sure when I first got there and we didn't have a facility and we didn't have even we had nothing and we had no players. We had to sell a vision and be creative about how we sold that vision, and we had to tap into the parts that you could sell. On UAB's campus at the time, the athletic facilities were zero. They were terrible. They were awful. They were worse than anything you've ever seen. However, we had really nice dorms, and we had a really nice student union that they had just opened, and we had great professors, and we had great tradition of football and that history. So we accessed the things that were good, and we highlighted the things that were good, and we were able to creatively from there build on to the things that later translated to football, right? So from a broader sense, I think making sure that you were creative, making sure that you were on the front end of this thing, and always, you just gotta continue to push the envelope in everything that you do. And there's a lot of great ideas that exist out there, and you got to make sure that you utilize the ones that are applicable to you. And certainly when you come in, I think that there's the scholarship numbers adjusting and things like that, or certain my experience in roster management, it will help us just from a standpoint of knowing how to utilize the things that we do. But there's a lot of great things here at Missouri. There's a lot of great things, more great things here than we had when we first started at UAB. And we got to be able to highlight those things in the right way. Certainly, everyone knows the football facility is fabulous, right? You've got to find a way to highlight that in such a way that people understand what's going on. But the campus itself is beautiful, and there's places on campus that you got to do. There's great history here. There's great tradition. There's a student body that wants to win. There's an alumni base that wants to win, and there's a little bit of a element of hasn't reached its full potential yet, which I think people are excited about. I think that's what Coach Drinkwitz sees. I think that one of his strongest traits is getting everybody to pull in the same direction and convincing everyone that, man, we got to go this way, because if we can just all work together, then man, we got a shot at making this thing great. And so as long as we utilize those messages and continue to push the things that we had and utilize past experiences, not just mine from UAB, but Curtis Looper's from, when he was a recruiting coordinator at Auburn and at TCU, and Charlie Harbison's been around for a long time. And then we got younger guys like DJ Smith and Ryan Walters who have fresh experience and are plugged into what's going on. And what we don't want to do is we don't want to be set in the ways of, we're going to do the same thing every single time just because that's what we got to do. Now, I think that you have to have a structure, a baseline structure. And I think when you have that structure, then you've got flexibility to work in and out of that.
All right, next one comes from Andy Kimball. Andy, go ahead.
Hey, Coach. I guess this next question, just as a recruiting coordinator, how have you and your team kind of dealt with having your first full recruiting cycle be mostly during like a dead period and being virtual? Like, how have you kind of managed to make relationships with like coaches and players despite not really being able to meet them?
Well, that's been an enormous challenge, and I think maybe that piggybacks on the previous question as well, is that, we had to be creative and forward-thinking as fast as we could, and we had to, the median with which we all worked, and we all did it to a degree, right? I mean, if you went to an office and then all of a sudden you're working from home, Well, we had to do the same thing, and we had to find a way to get out, still treat the recruiting period like we had to do, and we had to find a way to sell the things. I think one of the biggest challenges is one of the tenets of our program is get them on campus, right, of our recruiting philosophy. Get them on campus because there's such fabulous things to sell here, and there's so many things that we can get done. Hey, man, I appreciate it. Me too. Oh, sorry, let me hop out of here real quick. So we had to immediately refigure that train of thought. You know what I mean? How do you present somebody an opportunity to be on campus when you can't be on campus? And so I thought we dug really creative, and our entire building rose to the occasion on that. That goes from our IT guy that runs the IT that had to pump so much more to make sure that our Wi-Fi never let down when all of a sudden everybody's doing that, that's in charge of that on campus, to our equipment manager who comes in and 6 times a day maybe gives a tour of the locker room virtually, and so it's everybody came in and did a great job buying into what it is that we wanted to get accomplished. And I think that they all saw the goals that were out there in front of us, and certainly a unique experience. I do think that I'm sure you've all seen that there are maybe I don't even know the exact math, but I think there's 3 times more commitments this year at this time than have ever been at this time ever. And so that leads to some speculation. Maybe there will be more decommitments. Maybe there will be, what is and some of that is attributed certainly to uncertainty, I think, on the prospects' part, because they don't know if their spot's going to be available or not. But I also think that we have more of a concentrated effort to show these guys what we have, without traveling and driving in a car 8 hours a day and visiting 8 schools and then telling them, hey, man, you got to get to campus. Now I've got an opportunity to these guys now are more educated than the previous classes that are committed, if that makes sense, right? These guys know more about their program because we have been able to singularly focus on more specific players in these environments. And so they're more comfortable committing. And obviously it's a new world a little bit here, but I think that there's more knowledge there than normally exists in a typical recruiting cycle, just because, in the middle of May, when I would have been hitting 10 schools in Kansas City, I was hosting one individual player, and, which is something that may have in previous summers been delayed until middle of June or something. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you, Coach.
Yeah, man.
Next question comes from Mitch 40. Mitch, go ahead.
Hey, Casey. Eli just told us that when Daniel Parker was in the hospital in January, you went down to meet him and even had to overcome some car trouble, getting, I think, hit by a truck and hiking to find a ride. I'm curious, I know, had maybe not even met him at all or just gotten to know him. Why was it so important to you to be able to get there and even, go through all that to be there in person?
Yeah, well, it was, first of all, I'm really not that bad of a driver. I know that I just told you about my wife's car, and I was in that car accident. But this one was kind of a fluke deal, and then that one was I blamed solely on the blizzard and the 18-wheeler that hit me. But to answer your question, it was the first time that I met Daniel was when he was in that hospital bed, and it happened to be that day. And I told him I was going to be there. It was important. There was a lot of uncertainty at that time, and specifically for him, things were going, and every time that there was supposed to be news, like, okay, this is going to alleviate what's going on. Well, then there was more bad. Okay, now this bad things happened. Now this bad things happened. And so at the time we were in between hiring a trainer. Coach, we had reached out to him, and in the earliest conversations with the mother and with Daniel, it was, okay, we're just taking care of this toothache. And then all of a sudden it became something, and then all of a sudden it became something, to the point where Coach Drink and I were like, man, we just got to go see him. And so I don't know that in the moment that it ever struck me as being out of the ordinary that I got in a car accident and then I hiked my way into Kansas City to a hospital to see him. That just seemed like, I told him I was going to be there. It was important that I was there for him to know that we cared about him. And then, God lined things up to where we were capable of doing that. And I know Daniel was really nervous at that time, and it was important that Daniel knew that we cared about him. And it was a new staff, and we didn't, we hadn't had an opportunity to express all that to everybody on our team. They were in the middle of a 6-week break because of the bowl game and everything going on with that. And so, lack thereof. And so it was just an important thing to do. And I fortunate that the accident wasn't worse than it was, and it just happened to be the weather the way that it was that day. But it was good, and certainly I think has been good for Daniel's and I's relationship. But the number one thing is that Daniel was okay, and that he knew that we cared about him, and that we were interested in enough in making sure that he was being looked after.
All right, got time for a couple more guys. Let's go to Sweet Chief. Go ahead.
Hey, Casey. Yeah, kind of wanted to ask a little bit about football and Daniel, and I guess how much evaluations have you been kind of able to do with your tight ends, and just I know you only have 2 practices and everything.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we watched every game, obviously, from last year, and so Daniel stands out as a guy that y'all know that he's got ability, and that he has got toughness, and he's got football smarts, and he's that part of it was pretty easy early on. Now, obviously, there was a ton of uncertainty headed into spring. We were still a couple surgeries this out, and a lot of things had to change with everything going on with what was going on with him. So we had to take, we had to be a proactive approach to evaluating the guys that we had to evaluate, and which were the other, 6 tight ends that we've got here. And we had a long training period prior to spring practice starting, where you could see fundamental athletic movement, you could see competitiveness, you could see both athletic ability and also maybe intangible stuff. And you have an opportunity, just like you are anywhere, to build relationships with those guys and start understanding where they're coming from, and that's why we all coach to a degree, So, and then those 3 spring practices. Now, since then, obviously, there's not been a lot of evaluation time, but you know what? No one that's playing is having an opportunity to evaluate during that time either. So obviously you can see when guys show back up on campus, who's really been committed to their craft, and the ones that maybe aren't mature enough to handle that yet. And but to specifically answer your question, I watched Daniel play in every game that he played in last year, and you certainly see that the ability that he's got, and you see the toughness, you see the experience show up, and you see a guy that can fit into the offense that we're trying to run.
All right, Andrew Kaufman, go ahead.
Hey, Casey, quick follow-up. You said you hitchhiked to the hospital?
Yeah. So what happened is, outside of Odessa, I guess. So I was probably 2 miles outside of Odessa. It had been snowing, and then it turned into friggin' blizzard. And a car stopped in front of me, and I came to a stop, and it was a faster stop than I wanted it to be. And so when I got done, I looked in my rearview mirror, and I couldn't see anything. It was white out, and I immediately thought, oh shit, So it was, and so I'm sitting there with my hands on and then it boom. And so it could have been a lot worse. So the 18-wheeler that hit me had actually jackknifed, I assume. And the jackknife portion of the truck just hit me in the back. So it hit me in the back, and then I bumped whoever was in front, and it kind of spun me onto the side of the highway. And so when it came still, when the car was still, I was looking, and the traffic was coming at me. So I jumped out of the car real quick, because I didn't want to get hit while I was still in the car, and everything was together and all that. And but then by that time, traffic had slowed down enough and had realized what was going on. So it took a while for the state trooper to get there. I remember I sent a picture to Drink standing on the side of the highway, and I was actually very fortunate in the fact that it had been I was flying to Nashville for the coaches convention on that Sunday. So this was Saturday. I was going to fly Sunday to the coaches convention, and my roommate from college played for the Chiefs for a little while and settled in Kansas City. So he lives over in Overland Park. And so I was going to stay with him Saturday night after seeing Daniel, and then fly out Sunday. So I was in a rental car. So when I got out of the rental, it was all the back end of it was all smashed up and everything. So all I had was my 2 bags that I was going to take, and I didn't have to worry about really anything else. I called Miss Vonda, who's our, she controls everything up here for us, and she said, no, she was actually from that area, and called the sheriff, and so it was coming down like crazy. So after half an hour or whatever, when the tow truck driver eventually got the rental car hooked up, he drove me to Odessa, which was another 3 or 4 miles. Once I got to Odessa, I had looked on the I had looked on the map there, and there was a truck stop in Oak Grove, which is like another 6 miles. And so my initial thought was, man, if I can just get to Oak Grove, then I can get with one of these truckers, and I'll just ride into Kansas City with them. But there weren't any in Odessa. So I went into the gas station. There's a little Shell station right there when you get off the interstate in Odessa. And I walked in and I said, I will give $100 to whoever will drive me to Oak Grove. Because, I mean, it was pouring snow and it was miserable. And obviously you can imagine somebody walking into a gas station in Odessa and saying that's like walking in there and saying something you shouldn't. And, they all kind of looked at me. But fortunately for me, the old boy working the cash register got off it was like a 3 o'clock or something. I walked in there at 2:45 and it was 3 o'clock. And he said, I'll carry you when I get off. And he was great. And I was really appreciative of that. And he actually ended up carrying me all the way to Blue Springs. So I thought he was going to drive me to Oak Grove, but he was headed to Blue Springs anyway. He carried me into Blue Springs. And then by that time, my roommate from college, Brad, had driven to Blue Springs, and he picked me up. And then he and I drove to the hospital to see Daniel. And then I went and stayed with him that night. So, but I was blessed, man. I had a little bit of whiplash, but it wasn't even my car. So I had a lot better experience than Daniel Parker did. And so I was happy to get in there and see him and his mama and his girlfriend at the time. But that was my harrowing tale. So I
Did you give like $100
and prayed real hard, man.
Did you give him the $100?
No, he wouldn't take it. I did fill up his gas tank and bought him a case of water. So a case of water, of course, I bought him, but and a tank of gas.
All right, Coach. We're gonna let you
drive in snow, or have you driven in snow before?
Not a lot. Moving here from Alabama, I hadn't seen that. So the running joke there was when I moved here in December that I got offered the job on Wednesday. I flew in Friday night, and then it snowed 11 inches, Saturday. And I had not seen snow in 2 years in Alabama. And so I get up here, and then it snowed every Wednesday for like 7 straight weeks. And that happened to be that Saturday. I was probably going too fast for sure, but it's there's recruiting doesn't wait for weather. So you gotta strap on and go get after it.
All right, Coach, we'll let you go with that. Larry jumped on. So, Coach, you're off the hook. And Larry, are you still there?